In order, like a little bit to give a context on my today's presentation, I will take like 5 minutes to discuss like the whole project, which is kind of my dissertation, which I'm about to submit hopefully in the next couple of months. And I try to do a reconstruction of events that followed Partch's death. This month is exactly 50 years after he passed away. So it's kind of from 74 to 2024. And are connected with mainly with the continuation of his tradition and the challenges around it. So the first chapter has to do with the events that occurred in the US. And John, of course, you're here, and it was the most difficult and time-consuming chapter because the archival material are limited chronologically at some point, and then you have to find the people. John spent multiple hours talking to me or answering mails, and of course Johnny Reinhardt as well, Jack Corral, Philip Blackburn. This would be impossible without the documentation of many people, and then you have to arrange the events in a chronological order and see like the relationships that developed during those years, and especially when in any composer's tradition, when you have to deal with people that work with him personally, there is kind of a theological, or in the best way, a sentimental kind of approach to how you are supposed to play his music, what is the authentic or the real way, why some people can have access to the scores and the instruments and some others are not allowed to do the music. So the third chapter has to do exactly with the same thing, but in Europe. And it might look a little bit weird to all of you, but Partch traveled in Europe in 1934 as a scholar. And although he stayed a very short period there, many of his professional occupation as a composer, music theorist, and instrument constructor came from this period because he performed in front of Yeats when they discussed about the intoning of Oedipus, or he met him personally. This is a very sad story that it's very well documented, that apparently he didn't get the rights to use his Yeats text, so he wrote his own libretto, but Oedipus was a piece of the 50s and he visited 34, so he occupied himself more than 15 years with that. Additionally, he did a lot of research for his system in the British Museum, in the library, and among other people, he also met Kathleen Schlesinger, and he saw on her bench a guitar that she had made during the First World War, actually from an Orat's carton box, and by the guy that was reading her hitting machine. So, and he saw that and he made a sketch, and then he started experimenting on the guitar. He made different versions, and actually the new guitar one is from 72, so that means 40 years of occupation with something that he saw back in Europe. In his last interview, he tried to a little bit kind of limit the importance of his stay in the Europe, because he was kind of despised of all these kind of rich people. But I think that the importance is higher that he actually documented in the end of his life. Now, he never traveled again in Europe. His music was never performed live until after his death in 80. Dudley Mitchell traveled, then Dean Drummond, then John Schneider, Johnny Reinhardt, without having, of course, replicas, but other ways we will see. And since the beginning of the 21st century, there are sets of replicas in Europe. The one smaller is owned by Ensemble Scollatura. It's based in Amsterdam, and a bigger project was made in 2013 by Ensemble Musikfabrik that they constructed pretty much the whole instrumentarium parts, and now they have like the possibility of doing many, almost all of his works in Europe. Now, the chapter that is stuck in the middle, it's exactly what I will present today, and it's challenges in the continuation of his work that lies within Partch's work. And this is mainly for 3 reasons. First of all is because his identity as a theorist, an instrument maker and composer, they cannot sing separately. I mean, when you cannot only take the system and exclude the instruments or the compositions, or you cannot only take the instruments and say, I will do something else, because the system lies within the instruments and all these parameters are combined. The second thing is, of course, that a lot of things have to do with an oral tradition. I mean, Partch was himself there every time and in the beginning and trained the musicians, and this also had to do, John spoke about it, that he changed multiple locations, multiple times in a year, and he was carrying the instruments with him, and he had to find effective ways to train new ensembles every time for a performance that could be like days later, and then do that again and again. And after the 50s, he got a support to that by his friend, assistant, and heir in the end, Stanley Mitchell, who actually recently passed away as well. And the further away we go from this generation of people that work directly with Partch, this kind of oral communication of information starts getting more difficult because people that directly work with him are not available anymore. And the third thing, and it's very important, his compositional process was not linear. He reworked many of his compositions multiple times through his life because some of the time he had kind of a sound imagination, but he didn't have the instruments yet, like for example US highball. So when he constructed new instruments, he reworked the composition and he included the instruments, or he built bigger composition where he included smaller composition of previous years. But what Sot is doing nowadays, that they are publishing mainly the last version of every piece. It's a last version or a later version chronologically does not replace the previous one, and sometimes in order to decode information you need previous material, and we will see that. So I will not go deep into the instruments or the tuning system because I have presented that and I think it's pretty clear for all of you. I'm just presenting his 43-tone scale, and you see the ratios, you see the center deviation, and of course it's not equidistant. That means that within the equidistant semitones the steps are different. And the important thing is that for parts 1-1 and 2-1, of course, is the note G. Lou Harrison said that he got the tuning fork in G, and it's the inspiration of his system. Of course, it also fitted his voice register because he was intoning the music many times himself. So the parameters after examination is like the fragility of his instruments, we will see that, tablatures and reduced version for targeting for performance praxis, sometimes unclear actions on the score, changing in the tuning of the instruments, other parameters, pitches that lie outside the 43-tone system, missing information on the score, and some proposed transcription solutions. So, to go back to the cloud chamber balls, here we see a lover, okay, from the 11 intrusions, and you see what he wrote. It's like part 4 cloud chamber balls would need to be rewritten in any new performance. The original balls are now doubtless broken. That is the last time that he worked on the piece, that is 1962, and the notation has been changed. So, in the introduction to bonus record, he himself says that the sad part about the balls is that they do break. They do not break under the playing of a truly expert percussionist, but when one is broken, the chances are very slight that that particular one can be found again. So, Dean Drummond, who actually got the instruments on loan from the 90s and until he passed away in 2013, helped Music Fabric in the remake of the replicas, and he sent me the documentation that when I started working with parts when I was young, and he had the pitches written on the balls so that they were, and actually it felt weird because I would play the pitch and I didn't hear the pitches that were on there, and I figured out because he was the expert and I was 17 that I just needed to improve my ears. And I ended up concluding that Partch wrote down the pitches he wanted to hear, but not necessarily the pitches that were there. Now, the balls are broken through the years, and we don't have the technology. I'd like to find out how these are tuned, I mean the Music Fabric ones, because I don't know how to do it, because I've always done what Harry wrote how to do, which is when you cut a ball, when one breaks and you cut a ball, you rewrite the part to fit the ball. Okay. Maybe you can have your insights of how you tune them. But there is...
They can be tuned, but it costs a lot of money.
But if you cut it only higher, right?
Exactly.
You cannot.
You don't add. You don't make them bigger. You can only take things away.
So this is one of my favorite instruments, not because he was the greatest innovator, but he was the greatest ecologist, and he was kind of a drinker. So what he did is like when a liquor was ready, he did an instrument of that. So this instrument is called Zamuxil, and as many of his instruments is a multi-instrument. You see different players of playing. And he recognized that maybe there is an equal problem here. So he said in Genesis of the Music that, like the balls, these bottles sometimes break under excitement. But unlike the balls, this anguish, no anguish is involved. One simply buys another bottle and hopes for better luck. Now, it looks very nice, but actually trying to find today a bottle of whiskey from the 60s is not an easy job. And what I know from Musikfabrik, you see like on the right, on your right, the new version, and you see clearly that they are not the same bottles of the same brand. But I know that they made a contract with a local bar, and every night they got all the empty bottles delivered, and they tried more than 5,000 to be able to find the pitches. I don't know which are used, but you can understand the process.
I'm going through the same process
right now. So here you see another example that tablatures are a used version. So I have like, I will jump a little bit back and forth. The parts had most of the times as many tablatures as instruments. Every instrument has its own notation system, and for me in the beginning trying to decode the music, it's impossible. But it facilitated the easy learning of the instrument. He made the tablatures to be easy for the performers to play on them. So the thing is that you think when you get the Bach score that you have the easiest representation of playing the music, which is sometimes not the case. And here we see the musical passage from the Quiet Hobomil, and Karl Rosmans, he's the clarinetist of Ensemble Musikfabrik, solution. I'm really sorry it's from his iPad, so it's not a good picture, but I'm pretty sure you can see what he made. So Partch used the same tuning principles in set of strings in harmonic canon 1, and also in harmonic canon 2, which is the twins, Castor and Pollux. That means that each instrument is tuned the same for a set of 11 strings. That means 1 to 11, 12 to 22, 23 to 33, 34, 34, but differently for the right and left section of the instrument, and this is depending on the position of the bridges. That means that in the 44 strings, in each harmonic canon body, I mean Castor, we can have actually 4 and 4, 8 different pitches, and if you see the whole instrumental body, Castor and Pollux, you can have 16 different pitches. What Karl Rosman told me is like that I cannot count in real-time performance. I cannot count if I'm in the 12 or I'm in the 23. As you see like on the example, which is the original parts example, the first is like the third tone, it's glissando on the strings 23 to 33, and then on the second tone, which are the strings 12 and to 22, and Karl said I can easier see areas. So he reduced, and it's like if it's the area 1, he put the number 1, and if it's the area 2, he put the number 2, and it's easier to jump always in the correct session without having to count strings. If you think that this is kind of a reduction, you may see this one. This is Isaac Anderson. He is a percussionist under the Harry Partch ensemble in the direction of Charles Corral, and he simplified the score by visualizing the line of the instrument book. He placed a picture of the instrument under the bow part and marked the bamboo tubes on which he should play. You see that, the bamboo. And then he has the line following the score. And he wrote me to a mail. I made them all from scratch for myself, so I wasn't worried about intelligibility. But as I mentioned before, I don't regret making this, but I did let them hinder my overall experience. To that point, I made this during my second season with the ensemble, and never again after that for the remaining 4 seasons I was with them. And of course you understand that it's very easy to see what you play, But when you have to synchronize yourself with other musicians and follow like a little bit what's happening in the music, you have no idea because you blindly look on that. Of course, it's very, very practical. Boo is also a very complicated instrument to see exactly the tones when you have trained yourself for a performance like some days later. And here we see another example that is the beginning of study on Olympus pentatonic, which also ended in the 11 intrusions. And you see here like two different things. First of all, parts in some scores did what we do nowadays after over 50 pages in the beginning of the piece, performance notes. I mean, this is kind how you should tune the harmonic canon. This is not always the case. So for any string instrument that does not have ratios, the thing is following. You tune it, you pray that it will hold the tuning goes outside, you get the tablature, you play the number of the strings. Of course, this is exactly about muscle memory, you remember, but as you see, here in the beginning, he has 29, 30, 31, you go both, and then 32 is written down, and 31 up, and so he does not follow the direction of the actual move of the hands. If you play it like 3, 4, 5, 10 times, you remember that, but if you get that, in the beginning I was a little bit irritated, it's like, oh, 30, but you have to go up, and this happens in many of the pieces. Here, I have the worst ever performance that you will hear of parts that I made myself when I was in field research in Seattle. And Charles were very helpful. We brought all the instruments like the original parts way in one room. And I think, and I'm playing that only for a reason, that even if you do theoretical research when you're studying a composer like Partch, you have to put your hands on the instrument so that you understand how it's working. So this was one day's project for about 40 seconds of music. So first of all, I got the body and the bridges, and Chuck said, okay, tune it. That was 5 hours of my morning. And then I got the score of the almost pentatonic, only the harmonic canon. Okay, and I tried to play myself, and you see the solution I found because I accidentally hit other strings. I put a phone there to know where my hand should stop. And I will play that. Please, John, I'm really sorry. Thank you very much for my 16 hours occupation of the day. Was that? So, and we come back again to the thing that I'm not always putting performance notes. So this is the beginning of the Kithara part, which John did excellent on the adapted guitar. You wrote it yourself, right?
Yeah.
But the original is for Kithara. This is the super big Kithara of the 12 guitars, one behind the other of 72 strings. And this is the beginning of the letter from Hobo Pablo, which we heard live. Now, the thing is that it starts like that, and it looks like you do an arpeggio downwards. And the thing is like, okay, what a sound. And I'm putting here the two different tunings because at that point that I tried to analyze the piece, I only had Genesis of the Music, the version where he documented everything from the development of the system to the instruments to the tunings, but not the first book, because I think this is also out of the market since the 60s, so you cannot find it or buy it anywhere. And at some point, like you see, the latest version which I had is kind of on the left side, and you see like there are different ratios than the original version on the right side, and it's like, okay, which one is sounding. And in order to decode the information, if you go to a later version of the piece where he uses the harmonic canons and he describes the tuning and you understand that it's unisono with the harmonic canons, then you can find your way out. But if you don't, you have no idea. So you have to see other sources, and this is exactly the tonality flux that we discussed later, that it's a harmonic phenomenon that Partch used, changing between O and U tonality, like major and minor constructions. And this, of course, applied to the original tuning of the instrument, who he did not write in the score. Sometimes he does use the tuning of, and here was not the case. And maybe we want to hear what he says himself about that. I think I have to do here.
I am more inclined to think in terms of what I call tonal flux, rather than in the usual implications of progression or modulation. Here is an example, diagrammed on page 188 of my book, which I have used in at least 2 pieces of music. 2 triads, with each voice moving by about 1/3 of a semitone in one direction or the other. 8/7 O tonality and 7/4 U tonality. This tonal flux is used in the letter, the setting of a letter from a hobo friend. Cincinnati, Ohio, October 2nd, 1935. Hello, pal.
So, if you don't have this documentation of Partch himself that use, maybe you get a little bit irritated of what is the correct tuning. Sometimes it's easy to find, sometimes it's not that easy to find. Other parameters or inconsistencies, we talked yesterday about on the 7th day, Petals fell in Petaluma. From 64 and 66, there are like 2 versions, and it was composed from 1963 for the following 3 years as a preparatory composition for the later work, The Illusion of the Fairy, with the aim, I'm quoting Partch, to explore new techniques and also exploring with a minimum amount of players, untried rhythms and polyrhythms. Now, the first score of 1964 was created, as we heard yesterday, for 23 one-minute duets, which later became 5 quartets, 3 sextet, and 1 octet, which means that the originally independent duets were composed, 2, 3, and 4 of them were to be played simultaneously, forming a larger instrumental ensemble. In August 1966, Partch revised this composition with a different structure. I'm quoting again, using exactly 6 players before I was satisfied with all performance and recording. In this second version, Partch rearranged the 23 verses, exactly 1 minute long, not counting the final bit, with previously considered of duets and trios, into 10 quartets, quintets, and a septet, and overlapped them electronically. We discussed yesterday that the purpose was that he dumps every duet or the duet and the trio together to make larger formation. For that, he had to have exactly 1 minute long pieces. And you see, these are the same notes of counting, and there are many of them, and you see where there are the mistakes. Okay. Nowadays, the piece was released in 1965 as a record, but was never played live throughout Partch's life. Musikfabrik that did it, I don't think that any of the miniatures is exactly 1 minute long, but they can have, like, it can vary from 1 to, I don't know, 138 or something. It's almost double.
Because they're so damn difficult, they had to play it slowly.
Yeah, but they can have as many players as they want, and they don't have 6 apart. So the original purpose was limited by the fact that he wanted to do it as a dubbed composition. Then he had to limit himself to get all the mistakes out. 43-tone system. Is it consistent or not? Here you see his earliest first work that is called 17 Lyrics of Lippo, that he worked from actually the 30s until the 62, and so in contrast with all the other pieces, he never changed the instrumentation. He only experimented in different notational system in this piece. So the piece is for voice and adapted viola. We will discuss a little bit later. The important thing here is to see that next to the ratios, sometimes he notates a minus or a plus, or sometimes a diesis, and the problem is following. What is the ratio mean? How higher or how lower it is? And here we come to a very, very important project that started in 1979 and was initiated by Ben Jonson after Partch's death. He wanted to do a bigger project where he actually edits and transcribes all of his pieces, and he does a publication, and also the project was a construction of a complete set of replicas, which you all can imagine why this did not happen, because it was like an extremely expensive project. But in preparation to that, he and a young research group made by Jared Cameron, Ben Jonson, of course, with this cast, Bart Ben, Larry Polanski, Glenn Hackbar, Christopher Garner, and Mark Kilberstone, they tried to kind of transcribe the music. They didn't get very far. They managed to do the Lippo songs and some of the intrusions. The correspondence between them goes for about 6 years, from the 79 until 1985, and there are like a list of problems all the time. And one is like, how do we classify the notes that are not in the 43-tone scale? And it's like we find a ratio between the previous, the one that's written, and the next one, or the previous one, depending on if it has a plus or a minus. Part of course, this never became an independent project, but part of that was ended up in Cameron's master thesis of transcription. And here we see a missing information. That's the last thing that I want to present. It is like, here you see the long departed lover in version B. It is the first long departed lover that Partch wrote. And you see that he used ratios. No white, okay, now it's yellow for the time, for the years that passed, but white paper, no tempo, okay, no measure, nothing, of course. Why? Because it should be inspired by the rhythm, the natural rhythm of the human voice. And because he was not stupid, and because he sang many of them, he tried to support the voice always in the entrance by adapted viola tone in unison. And then he could sing, and then again there is this kind of unisony, always overlapping between voice and instrument, so that he helps actually the good intoning of the voice. You see a position here in the I cannot sleep, and you see that the adapted viola plays a 16 to 11, which comes in the voice. Okay, and then they have a unison in 4 to 3, and then they go to 11 to 8, where the voice stops and the adapted viola continues. Here you see exactly the same piece 30 years later in a reworking. Now you see an extra instrument, which is the chromelodion, the reed organ, which is not participating in the composition. What Partch did after some point, because the reed organ had a very stable tuning that would not change, he used it as an assistant instrument for the voice. So always the vocalist should go to the chromelodion and play the pitches. This is not the sounding pitches, these are the played pitches. The chromelodion is set in a piano tablature. You play that and you hear whatever reed is attached to the key that you play, and then you have to study your part. So this is a kind of assistant instrument, but not participating in the composition. And you see exactly the same position in I Cannot Sleep. He probably forgot to write the keys on the commelodion. Of course he has the adapted viola keys, but since he omitted the ratios in the voice, you cannot know if it is in unison with the adapted viola or not, because the commelodion keys are not there.
On the other hand, those very same notes are seen earlier on the score, so you can go, oh, the B flat on the commelodion is the same as the one down there. It was a shorthand. He was being lazy.
Yeah, of course, but the problem is, I can understand, we go back, and this is the problem in the transcription. It's like, what do I do here? Of course, but this is also the point that when you decode a piece that has like 6 different versions over 30 years, you have to have the previous versions as well, to reconstruct the information. But then you see that it's like, what are we doing? Which ratio is it made? Is it the 16 to 11, or is it the 11 to 8? Many of these, there are like lists of those questions, and many of these also show that they were also a little bit afraid to take responsibility of one answer after the other. So these letters were going back and forth, and it was like, what can we do here? And it's like a little bit this kind of master and student thing, that are we allowed there to take a decision, and maybe it was not meant like that. Some cases they also went back to the recordings, and this is not the example but it's the example of the Lover of the Illusions, where they say, Chris Garner went there and said, yeah, Partch is not singing the correct pitches, but then it was the last piece of the recording and the session was very long, and he still did his best of the...
He made mistakes.
Yeah, of course, and he was allowed, but then when you try to approach the music for analytical purposes, you are like, I don't want to take responsibility in deciding. Bob Gilmore, who did the first transcription, was based on the original versions, the early version, so he didn't have this problem. The problem that Bob Gilmore has, there is no problem, but it's like, as you see here, he uses a B flat, the approximation on the 12th tone, equidistant tone, but you see there are like 3 different ratios corresponding to that, different center deviation. So in a first eye, it looks very easy, and it's like, okay, it's an area of B, but if you really want to play the piece, then you have a problem, because you have like 3 levels of understanding. The one is like, okay, it's around B. How much around B? Let's see the ratio, let's see the center deviation. And here, you see the so-called, And what you see is he goes for the D flat. But the first D flat from the second D flat, they are actually almost 1 semitone distant. And you cannot see that with bare eye. Then you have to. Excellent work, but has the problem of multiple levels of understanding and decoding if you really want to tune. The problem is not existing here, and this is what we discussed yesterday about Ben Johnston notation, because Ben Johnston tells you, if you compare the 11 to 8 to 4 to 3, you use this sign. And then you have this sign, and you know exactly the interval to the next piece. This is not absolute pitches, they are like the interval from the previous tone. And when they reach the decision, you see here clearly that the first one is higher than the second one. Okay, and how much? Now, the problem here, although I think it's one of the most accurate representation, is that you really have to know Ben Johnston symbols, and this is not easy. Even for me, I need like the guide always to see how higher or lower. So for someone that really does not know the system, I don't know if it helps very much. And we come to my solution, which is the best, it's I pressed the system, with another team of researchers, we work in doing some transcription, in actually 72 idiom, that is making a non-equidistant system in an equidistant one, which is wrong, and I know, but the thing is that there are limiting number of symbols that are deriving from the ones that are very well known, which are the quarter tones, the 12 tones, what represents the 5th harmonic or underharmonic with single arrow, and then with the 7 harmonic, okay, or subharmonic with double arrow. In this case, although you have an approximation in 12 of tones, you can clearly see what is the approximate distance, so that it's almost 1 semitone. But of course, for that, you also need the ratio and the sense. The good thing about that is that you don't have a simple repeating, so you don't have like kind of double interpretation of any note. And in order to, I have like, this is the final comment, that I didn't find any ideal proposal. And the whole point is that these serve different things. You want to play the music, you want to play the music without having the instruments, or you want to analyze the music, and then you have to develop your own tools. Now, for closing, just because we spoke a lot about that, it's a very loving from us, from Joe Snyder, and you can see the instruments also in the back, and I have only the beginning, so we hear that and then on that. And that's all. Yeah.
Thank you very
much. And I'm good to write.
We have moved actually into the time of our final talk, so maybe if there's just 1 or 2 very quick comments or questions, and then after, during the break, if there are more, but I just want to kind of stay on schedule if we can. Are there any? Yes?
I have a question. So you're describing all these pieces, but are you gonna like publish them so everybody can use them, or they are only for your analytical purposes?
I mean, you mean the transcriptions?
Yes.
Some are already published. I mean, the Ben Jonson one, you can find in the archive, unfortunately, or you can find online the Cameron's master thesis, which it's not that high, and you see some of them. Some of my transcriptions are also published, but to be honest, there are not a lot. There are like mostly the earlier pieces, because the bigger the instrumentation it gets, the harder it gets to decode. So I think that until now there are like some transcriptions, 3 or 4 different ones, including mine from the Lipo songs, from Letter from Homo Pablo, and from some of the inclusions. So actually some of 3 works.
Okay.
So, I mean, the field is completely open. You are very welcome to do that yourself. And and some of the petals, but because the duets, because there is easier. When you have a minor instrumentation, you can follow up, and when you start having like complicated things, it's
of course.
I don't want to put my hands and take my eyes out.
Alright, so you're not gonna plan on continuing this project, like transcribing these pieces, or are you gonna? do that in future?
I don't know. I mean, John, you can tell.
This way lays madness.
No, the problem is following that when you present that in the first generation of successors, they don't like it necessarily, because it's what Danley wrote me that is kind of Partch's notation is not target to analysis, only to performance, and he was not interested in it. It's like, don't do it. And now he passed away, so I suppose that's... no, I mean, it was not his problem, but then at some point, there is this kind of Scott from the archive, we discussed about that, told me off the record that if someone asked for the scores to perform the music, they always ask, why do you need it? It's archival material, you can go there and make a picture and take it out, but they always had to have this kind of oral approval from the hair. Oh. And he could say, no, I don't approve of this performance. And then, you know, is this kind of not legal but ethical bond to that when someone says, I don't approve that because it takes out or it gives something that Partch was not interested in, and especially this opens the road to do performances with other instruments like the adapted viola. You go, you take any string instrument, you do the approximation. Johnny Reinhardt did a lot of that, and they didn't approve that because you had to have the instruments. So you open a door that they didn't necessarily want to be open. Okay, and I think we are in this transition phase that people will do it in the future. But you're very welcome. Then I will use it.
But there is one piece, the Barstow 1968 version by the AR Editions. Somebody did the entire thing. You get the facsimile and you get it, sadly, in Johnston notation.
Yeah.
But at least it's printed and it's available. So look that up, and that's might be a guide.
Yeah. Castle did an analysis. You can find this online as well, like the whole thing in John. But there is the map of Johnston notation as well, so you have all the information there, and you just have, this is what I did to decode, this accidental goes that, and if you read it, I don't know, 15 times, then it's okay at some point.
Make it 20 times.
25 million times. You see, like 40 minutes of music.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Words about Daniel Corral. He's a mixed heritage Filipino-American composer performer, born and raised in Eagle River, Alaska, based in Los Angeles since 2005. His creative practice draws inspiration from our own extended faculties, end quote. This manifests via a combination of pop culture and experimental music, conceptual rigor, unique instrumentation, performance in outdoor and or public spaces, microtonality, consideration of the relation values of performances and work that addresses current issues. Daniel's music has been commissioned and presented by many venues, including BAM Next Wave Festival, Sundance Film Festival, Band Center, and Joe's Pub, including many more listed in the program. And I did see that we have a new, I think, delivery of some programs that are here somewhere in the building now. Daniel's taught at Cal Arts in Los Angeles and has been commissioned by many institutions. He is the operation director and Grammy-winning Partch Ensemble Director of Development for Monday Evening Concerts, on the board of Microfest LA, co-artistic director of the Now Here Ensemble. His topic today will be lecture recital 2 of Pentacles. I'll give you Daniel Corral.
Thank you. So I have a little bit of technical difficulties from my own fault a while ago, having spilled water on my computer.
Oh dear.
So getting a new one next couple of weeks. But because of that, for the sound part will come from my laptop, and the video will come from my iPad. Which is largely because if I plug in HDMI to this computer, it freezes. So hopefully you guys can see that. It's sort of big enough. So Just a second, let me just open this other thing before I start doing two things at once. Alright, so I'm going to talk about this piece called Two of Pentacles, which is for this Just National guitar, which I've had for a little while on loan from John Schneider here, who is involved with a lot of the pieces here today, and in the last whole weekend. And also some Icosany chimes, which I've been running basically with little robotic controllers. And so I'll kind of describe the piece and then play maybe about 8 minutes of it, and then come back and talk a little bit more about it. So this project came about because before I go, the last time I presented at the Ecmella conference in the Microtone is beautiful, I was talking about some launch pad pieces I did, where I played with these launch pads with overhead camera in the dark, kind of like shadow puppetry, and essentially, plain tonality diamonds, which was a different sort of practice. And so a lot of the pieces I've been doing since then have been about translating this sort of vocabulary into acoustic instruments. So kind of taking kind of combining that, and what have I learned from those pieces. So this piece, Two of Pentacles, came because I got this grant from the city of LA, individual master artist project. And so some of the stipulations for the grant were this needs to be a solo performance. So I had this idea for a duo performance. So to make that happen for these chimes I decided I'll make them these robotic controllers, which I've had in mind for a while. And it is a neat idea. In order to play it, like I played it actually here in New York as part of the Striped Lights series about, I think, March or something like that. And I used the samples I'll use here, which I just recorded. And for those of you guys who are into this sort of thing, just using like a round robin sort of sampler of myself having played the chimes, and then going from there. And in the future, I'm going to do live versions of it with a percussionist, actually Nick Terry from Partch Ensemble. So the instruments that I have here, this guitar, which I'll get out in a minute, which maybe you guys are familiar with. I'm not going to talk about it too much. Resonator guitar with this tuning designed by Lou Harrison. That's me holding it. And a bit about the tuning of it. There's this paper by David B. Doty talking about it. It's in essentially a just version of a DAD-GAD tuning with these stacked just fifths in the lattice here, and I'll zoom in so you can see it. I know it's small. You can see these just fifths that kind of show up here going horizontally, and there are these 5/4s vertically, and 7/4s diagonally, and 11/8s going that way. So you have this lattice, and he just wrote out the ratios. Essentially, being a student of Lou Harrison's, he wrote it pretty similarly to how Lou Harrison would have. The instrument that I made for this is these Icosany chimes, because I've been going down the Irv Wilson rabbit hole. And this is 20 notes in 2 octaves, so 10 notes in one octave, 10 notes in the other octave. I don't have the video of me playing the notes, but here's the controllers that I used to play them. It's pretty sloppy looking, but you can see this little box that'll take CV signal from my interface, a Motu interface, which I have running from Ableton Live. And then on this little bar, I have basically super simple solenoids with, wooden balls and some felt on them. The nicer way would be to have yarn mallets attached to the solenoids. With the grant money I talked to a guy about potentially doing some versions where I could have more dynamic control, but that would have cost far more than I could afford. So this version, dynamically, is kind of flat, but at least I can get the rhythms I want, the pitches I want, and I can work on getting dynamics when I have a live player to work on it with me. So that's the robotic part of these chimes. Again, Irv Wilson rabbit hole. Do you guys know his work in lattices and all this stuff? Does anyone? Yeah, okay. So these are his multi-dimensional lattices. yeah, there's a lot to this stuff. I've been focusing on this guy, which is essentially the most complex of this series of lattices, the icosany, which is a 20-note group. And I'll sit down and zoom in some more. So, the one I've been using is the most basic one, the 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 icosany. I've kind of stuck here for a few years now, partially because my kind of compositional vocabulary within just intonation is a bit new. It still feels new to me, so I felt like sticking with this one system for a while is probably the most effective way to really hone in a vocabulary and then apply it to other systems once I feel more confident in it. So I've stuck with this one for quite a while. I'll zoom in a bit more. So I decided to have my 1-1, 2-1, whichever you want to call it, as A, concert A 440, because I had written a chamber music piece, and it got funding to make the chimes from part of this doctoral project that I'm still finishing. And so I wanted the pianist to be able to play some piano notes and also a synthesizer on their on the desk of the piano. So if I made this 440, because of the way the notes turn out, I get this A, and also on the right side you can see this E flat ends up being, plus or minus approximately 0 cents. It's a little bit, it's like 0.001 cents, but not that audible. So that gave me some very functional things. And notationally, I've been trying for myself, doing the Helmholtz-Ellis thing and trying to figure out how that would work. And that's kind of new for me. I've been working with a little ensemble that's going to do its first show next month in LA. And talking with them about what would be helpful for them to read this. I started out doing it with what Johnny Reinhardt suggests, which is just flats and sharps plus synth deviations. But a lot of the musicians I'm working with, some of them are like jazz musicians, and they found seeing the numbers to be too complicated. Mm. So seeing accidentals at least tells them something is up, and then using their ears from there. So trying to figure out what is the functional way to work with people on this sort of system is tricky. And on the bottom you can see that's how I've kind of broken it down. Essentially 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 4, 6, 7, well, technically 8 with the quarter tones notations, because you can kind of break it all down into groups of 3 notes divided by just fifths. And then the chimes are in 2 octaves. I'm not going to go too far into it, but it breaks down into 2 decanies, 10-note groups that exist within the icosany. So to kind of break that down a little bit is we have the generating hexad, that some of you guys know this well, but if I give it these numbers as variables, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, all the vertical lines are just fifths. The yellow lines here are all just, 5th partial, 7th partial, 9th partial, 11th partial. So when I come out here and see these 2 decanies, I have 2 of them. Well, none of them have the 11th partial in them, but they're all the lowest partials, and you get these nice relations, very, low partial relationships, which are, it seems like a good way to divide this music up, and for making these chimes, it seemed quite functional. So, what I decided to do, because I had these chimes, or if I were continuing with the Irv Wilson sphere, you might call them tubelongs, because I've been interviewing a lot of his students, and that's kind of how they would call these tube instruments. I'm not going to go into that part, but in order to sort of show how the guitar and the chimes fit together, I took the lattice of the resonator guitar, put it into the same sort of dimensional space as the icosany, and you get these 12 notes. Essentially, they can overlap with the icosany kind of coincidentally. If I tune the guitar down 2 cents, I get these 7 notes that are in this overlapping diagram over here. I guess zooming in doesn't really help a whole lot. So I get 7 notes with these pretty, simple ratios between them. And so for this piece, it became idea of having a harmony study. What can I do with this? And part of the inspiration for putting this piece together the way I did came from, looking at a bunch of conceptual art, and in this case, thinking about Solowit's incomplete open cubes, which he just drew all the different versions of a cube in which you have all the vertices. And in this version, he says these are all the different shapes that come and make this. These vertices from 3 lines, 4 lines, 5 lines, etc. And of course, there's lots of different versions where he's built these things out. In this case, these are kind of small ones. You can see various versions of these all over.
As public art?
Some of them. Some of them are in galleries. Some of them is public art, like outside at a park or at some building. Often you'll see 1 or 2 of them. Like you might see like that one and that one sitting out in the lawn or something, which is interesting because you don't really get the concept of it that way, but you get this visual shape, which I feel like with Lewitt, it was always interesting. Like, do people need to know that that's the idea, or can that be its own playful thing on its own, which is a fun sort of space to live in. So, inspired by that, and also a need to sort of understand what this musical vocabulary is I'm working with, I just kind of did basically the same sort of thing. I guess I'll zoom in. So I took all the 2-note groups, 3-note groups, 4-note groups, 5-note groups, and 6-note groups, and did a catalog of them. Also thinking of Tom Johnson's chord catalog, piano piece, or I have this old copy I found in some used bookstore of Schillinger's Kaleidophone. Has anyone seen that book? Yeah. For those of you who haven't, it's essentially like a catalog of notes and potential intervals between them. So like C to E, it'll tell you. Here's the ways to get there with 2 notes, 3 notes. C, D flat E, C, D E, C, D sharp E. 4 notes, C, D sharp, D, E, etc. So you get all the possible notes to get from A to B. So that's kind of what I was thinking of, those sorts of things as far as understanding all the possible intervals of this piece. So then like, how can I do this in a way that seems sort of musical or interesting to me? So I made a shorthand score, because I'm playing it myself. I don't really need to write it down for anybody yet, which I do soon. So, I had made myself sort of a lazy version of the score, which I'll zoom in on. And I didn't put any of the Helmholtz accidentals or anything in here. So basically what's going on here, it sort of starts with 2 notes, expands to 5 notes, back to 2 notes, 5 notes, 2 notes, up to 6 notes. Occasionally it starts over, but really it's kind of trying to have the density of the intervals sort of expand and contract throughout the piece. So that became the general idea of what I was going to do. Essentially a harmony study of the notes that's still kind of musically interesting. And thinking about experience with playing these launchpad pieces around, and like, how can I make this the most functional piece that I could play into the future? Decided to sort of keep this vocabulary of, minimalist rhythmic cycles, so that I could do a 30-minute version of it, 20-minute version, I could do an hour-minute version of it. And so that kind of helped a lot as far as thinking about how is this a very portable piece for myself. Then, the sort of symmetrical addition, subtraction of beats, being that it starts in a meter of 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 17. Those are just the meters for myself to remember. And actually, you can see sort of the divisions of the meter. So if I say this one is 4 measures of 5/8 plus a measure of 3/8, which then goes to 3 measures of 4/4 and 7/8. And some little notations of what the chord is at that moment, because you know, it gets hard to remember. So I have this very shorthand score for myself, but not totally notated. That's kind of a project for the next month, as I am learning Dorico with many other people. So I decided to keep some other ideas of, you know, classical forms, and with a very super loose version of like a ritornello sort of idea. We have this tempo of 160 it starts in, and it goes to 100, back to 160, and so it keeps returning to 160 just tempo-wise. And then the other alternating tempos get a little bit faster. So with all those ideas, I kind of set up a framework. It's like, all right, this is a little constricting, but also thinking of that Stravinsky idea of restrictions kind of give you a lot of room to play on with from there on. So that was kind of what I decided. I had this idea, 7 notes. These are what the harmonic progressions are going to be. There's the rhythms. What can I do with that? And so that's kind of where I went. And then it's like, I'll just see what I come up with all those restrictions and ideas. So that's what's next. Oh yeah, that's so basically. I'm going to play this much of it, these first 2 lines of this piece, which I can maybe don't need to talk too much about what's going on as far as what I'm playing. I'll just play it, but those are the notes. As you can see, it starts with very, very simple harmonies, very much thinking about that Lou Harrison's idea of like, let's keep these very, the goal is to have these smooth harmonies, you know, JI sort of harmonic fusion, all that, as opposed to keeping it more dissonant. And also, when I premiered it, it was as part of this grant, a performance at Grand Performances in downtown LA. And so thinking about audience-wise, you know, thinking about who is it that's going to be there hearing it? Are they going to want to eat microtonal food? Are they going to want to like just hear something nice? So with that in mind, you know, the person performing before me was doing a poetry reading. The person after me was doing this like costumed belly dancing show. You know. So it's like there's not a lot of people coming in to hear a lot of microtones. So you know, it really kind of eases into all that throughout the performance. You know, you can see A, G flat, or F sharp in there. So it's very digestible harmonies to start with. To sort of ease into it. And I think they get a little bit crunchier, the intervals, as it goes into the middle of the piece. But yeah, that was very much the idea. How can I keep it simple, complex, and then simple again? And also that also kind of drew a bit from when I was, one of my earlier jobs was organizing the archives of James Tinney. And there's this great interview with him and Lucky Moscow, who's another composer. The other one, there it is. And they were talking about, well, mostly drinking wine, but they were talking about just music and a bunch of things. And one of the things that Jim said, kind of facetiously, is that there are only 2 musical forms. There's no more. Everything is either A-B or A-B-A, and that's it. Which is, I think, pretty fun. And with this idea of how can you can kind of fit most forms into that in some way or another. And it gives you a lot to think about. So this idea of A-B versus A-B-A kind of comes into a lot into this piece. So I'm going to play a bit of this. Like I said at the beginning, I'm going to have the sound come out of my computer, which I know is a bit lo-fi here, but I feel like it's going to be okay. So, there we go. Hold on a minute. All right, computer. Just a minute. Oh, let's see what I did. So I guess I should mention that this is I'm doing this sort of thing where you have these loops is best served by doing this in something like Ableton Live. So I have the chimes triggered out of Ableton Live, and I use a little air turn controller to control it going from one to the next, which actually works quite well, and yeah, keeps it pretty simple and streamlined. I'm going to be also kind of, for the sake of time, lazy about getting it more in tune than it is, which I know we're. All right, that's working. That's working. All right. So, I still, because of all the water on the laptop business, I'm using a paper score, and my full Apple Armada includes my phone. Because of the idea of having it timed bits per section, this actually is good for keeping track of how long I've been on each section of the piece. So as far as this idea of a harmony study, I stay on each harmony for a fairly specific period of time. All right, so I'm going to play these first two lines of this piece. So it was basically being kind of, what sort of slightly more playful sort of riffs and melodies on the chimes could I come up with the rough idea that I had this harmonic movement as the general sort of foundation of this piece. As you can see, when I'm playing it, I usually have this air turn pedal, Ableton Live, using basically the CV control plugin that they have. The device I kind of zoomed in on a minute ago, which is down here. I didn't take a good picture of it, but it's it's something I ordered actually from a guy in the Netherlands that would basically convert the voltage a little bit better so that you can control solenoids with power coming from the Motu, which the Motu I have this ultralight in K3, and every time I use it I realize this thing is so utilitarian in so many ways, including it's kind of built to already send CV level signal if you set it to that, which not all interfaces will do. So there's a lot to that device I've been pretty happy about. In the future of this piece, part of it is I'm getting a guitar. Returning this guitar to John and moving on with not having a resonator guitar. I am getting this movable fret system from Tolgahan and Suleiman in Turkey. It should arrive by the end of the month. I'm crossing my fingers because I do have this show in mid-October. I'm hoping to use it for, so it's kind of cutting it close, but I think it'll be okay. So he sent me a picture. This actually picture in the middle is the neck that will go on my guitar. That's going in the mail tomorrow. So hopefully it gets there. So in order for this group to play this, this Rotations Ensemble is a group I've been kind of working on. After some conversations with, Stephen James Taylor about his obsession with this guy Ben Greulet and these geometric Greulet shells. It's real deep. He's really deep into this, but this idea of rotations of things became really interesting for this group. So I'll be playing this guitar. This neck on a Telecaster guitar, plus someone playing fretless bass. It was going to be upright bass, but we found in trying it out that there are some notes that are a bit droney for the bass to play, and 10 minutes of squeezing one note is a bit stressful on the hands. So fretless bass is easier. Cello, violin, and someone playing percussion/drum set. And with that in mind, doing the Dorico and notating this piece and a few other pieces that use the icosany system that I have is going to be basically what's coming up next for this stuff. The last thing I'll mention, 2 of Pentacles. I've been naming smaller pieces after tarot cards, partially because naming things is difficult. And there's a very specific and very vague meaning to all of these things. So it's kind of useful if you find one that's kind of like, this is kind of what I was thinking and feeling, but you can't really say that in a piece expressly. So it's kind of programmatic while not at all being programmatic, which I find to be useful. And I guess that's what I have to share. Do you guys have any questions in the last couple of minutes?
Yeah, it was great. So what we heard, you're going to notate all of that.
Yeah.
And that will be pretty, And did we hear it appeared to me that we heard more than what you had up on the screen.
No, that's pretty much what
you really were following that with 15 per chord.
Yeah, right. Because basically each of these, what's written down as a quarter note, is a chord, which is 15 seconds.
15 seconds, yeah.
Yeah, and this is just generally the area where I'm going to be playing that. You can see it's very tiny movements, translation of from chord to chord by adding or subtracting, usually a single note, maybe a note or two, so that it's really transparent, the process through the piece. And common tone modulations through every single one.
When you mention a tough act to follow when you're between a belly dancer and some Shakespearean sonnets, it is interesting the effect that chimes have because they're always dealing with microtones.
Yeah.
And so I think people wouldn't it would actually just have a logical kind of timbre about it, what you're doing.
Sure.
I think it'd be different if you just kind of had your guitar and playing that. But hearing that type of bell, the chimes in there, creates a very kind of, I think, embracing environment for what you're doing your guitar.
Oh, thanks.
Very effective.
They're both metal, and it seems to help. If anyone's going to be making any chimes in the future, I decided to be difficult to try and make these out of steel, originally thinking they might live outside. But aluminum is much easier to work with, I've discovered. And there's a great website this guy has, whose name I'm blanking out. It has like everything comprehensive you'd ever want to know about making, well, in his case, wind chimes, but it applies to all these sort of tube or anything. It could be like solid rods or tubes. And like there's even an Excel calculator on there. You can put in the material, internal, external diameter of it, specifically the frequency you want, and it'll calculate it.
But we talk about how, we, at least in Western culture, hear things, most people hear things in equal temperament, A440, but not with regard to church bells.
Oh, yeah.
So they're acclimated to microtones all the time. So I think that's the kind of area where it's just interesting to think about that for a lot of us, microtones are just very much alive in that type of milieu.
Lou Harrison wrote a double concerto for violin, cello, and gamelan. And after recording it, the cello player said it was like playing Brahms in Big Ben.
That's a very good analogy.
That sounds a little bit like John Fahey.
Oh, yeah, I can see that. That's a good way to put it. And actually, after the belly dancer was this woman who did an opera singer, Jasmine Orpia, in case anyone knows her. But she's an opera singer, but she has a bunch of Kulintang, Filipino gamelan. Her family's from Mindanao, southern Philippines. So we were talking with them. They're like, I hear a lot of this, because I'm Filipino. And she's like, I hear a lot of the sort of similarities with the gamelan stuff, which makes sense because, years ago I played in Balinese gamelan group, but it's been a long time. So this idea of those sorts of rhythmic cycles and that sort of ringing music really does tie into it. And the other thing you were mentioning, church bells, is when I first made these chimes, I was kind of actually inspired. My wife's dad is a cellist and teaches a cello clinic in a small mountain town in Tuscany. It's a town called Corral. It's outside of Lucca. And we were there for their festival of Santa Maria, which for them is actually in August, as opposed to the one that's in down south, which is in the spring. And so there's some point where they have this, we were woken up at midnight because there were church bells going on for 45 minutes. And what is going on? So I recorded them, and it did kind of give me this idea. And actually, this other piece that I'm releasing later this year on Innova Records is more kind of derived specifically from thinking about church bells, and not necessarily like change ringing, but all the notes play slowly at the same. The rhythms, the polyrhythms, are the same relationships as the ratios of the notes. So that sort of thing, more specifically about something that is inspired by church bells, but it was definitely on my mind when I was making them, wanting to make them.
Did you ever think of doing we didn't hear the whole piece, but doing the reverse process, like starting from a cluster and filtering out? Because for me, at some point, the principle became clear that, it will fill in the gaps. And maybe I think that this creates like another expectation of hearing which is the actual interval that you will end up with. Because if you can filter out different things, you end up with different parameters. So did you use that?
Well, it kind of expands and contracts most of the time. I guess down here is an example that goes from 2 up to 5. I can point up here, 2 to 5 and back down the 2 notes. So that's still pretty limited. It doesn't go very far, but it does expand and contract. The harmony.
No, I was meaning only for the because also in this scene it's the A-B-A form that you're, and maybe starting from B and coming back to A.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the goal, I think, was to keep it simple and easily digestible first and move towards something that maybe is, more complex in a way that I appreciate that, I don't know, thinking about, like, what would land well, I guess, in that sort of context. But yeah, it's a good idea. And I do think about that, like, again, thinking about Tinny, this version of, like, Blue Suede Shoes. You guys know that collage #1? Where it starts very noisy, and then it becomes clearly that Elvis piece. And it's like, you either go from, so that would be, I don't know, in what you were talking about, going from the B part to the A part. And for this piece specifically, kind of didn't do that. But yeah, there's other cases where that makes a lot of sense. It's a good idea. Cool. Any other thoughts?
No, thank you so much.